Hello and welcome to the Footballco Business Podcast. I'm your host Alex Manby, and today I'm talking to Owen Blackhurst, co-founder of the award-winning quarterly football publication Mundial, the iconic magazine with a dedicated cult following. We're here to discuss the origins of Mundial, how it's evolved over the years and continues to adapt with the times in the face of significant pressures on the print industry. Before we get into it, I'm delighted to share the breaking news that Mundial is now part of the Footballco family after an acquisition was recently completed. Owen, welcome to the podcast and welcome to the company.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on the pod. And looking forward to getting started in Footballco.
Terrific. Now, Owen, let's rewind to the beginning. It's 2014. Mundial is launched on the eve of the Brazil World Cup. Now, marketeers know that World Cup as the social media World Cup. Second screening was a huge thing. Twitter records are about to be broken. Everyone's talking about the digitalization of football audience and the accompanying shortened attention spans. And yet you launched Mundial with the polar opposite proposition, print and long-form journalism. Talk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it like that, it seems like an awful decision. But it was... We set up the social media accounts probably 6 to 9 months before to develop an audience and to develop a tone of voice. So it wasn't as if we were going in cold, and it was more about, it was only ever meant to be a one-off. So there was no grand plan. It was meant to be a one-off magazine produced by a group of people who had worked together or paths had crossed within football and had a desire to do something in print and believed, more importantly, that there was a market, however niche, for the printed product, and something that celebrated football away from the news cycle a little bit, because we all know that 99% of the news cycle is given over to 1% of the game, and that's fine and that's great, and that's something we all do and we all interact with. But there is a huge part of football that probably wasn't covered as much, that you're seeing more now. The culture side of it, travel, looking back, looking forward. So we just wanted to be able to expand on things a little bit, but then we still did lots of bite-sized and funny stuff through social. So it was more of it was trying to build a brand that was a bit 360. But print was undeniably the banner project. The banner project to begin with. As I say, it was meant to be a one-off thing, but people liked it. It sold out, and then before we know it, we were committing to 4 a year.
And did you do it at first for that first edition because you wanted to do it and because you thought it was a fun project, or were you already thinking about a target audience who might love this kind of thing?
We knew there was a target audience, but that was more sort of stick your finger in the air and think there's probably more people like us, rather than any great focus grouping or research. So no, it was very much seen as a one-off, fun. A distraction from, we were all in full-time jobs at the time, so a bit of a distraction, the chance to do something physical, which I think is always nice. We all had agency and TV and digital backgrounds as well as print backgrounds, so it's not like, it was launched because of sort of a dislike of other formats. It was just more that feeling when you get something back tangible like a print magazine that you've worked on is similar to when, you'd go and buy your first album, or you get a new pair of trainers when you're young, and all those things that give you a bit of social currency, and that's what we wanted to do. We just wanted to launch something that people really look forward to having and buzzed off having when they had it, and liked how the paper felt and how the illustrations looked, and how it felt to read long form in print again. So yeah, there was a lot of reasons for doing it, but it was more a love of the game and a love of the medium. The
way you talk about it reminds me of people who buy vinyl, which in itself is enjoying an amazing revival. They wax lyrical about that kinesthetic joy of handling the record and feeling it, and how different that is to playing, CDs or mixing purely digitally. Do you see a similarity there?
Yeah, and I think it's probably wider than just vinyl. There's a phrase I heard years ago, and I roll it out every now and again because I think it makes me sound clever, but I didn't come up with it. But it was about the McDonald'sization of society, and I just thought that pretty much nailed where things were, and anything that sits outside of that, I think people like it. I think people want things that aren't as disposable. Everything is throwaway, and to have something that is constantly there, whether it's a vinyl on the shelf or whether it's, some of the books you've got behind you or a magazine on a table, to have it constantly there. I just think it's hard to explain, but you could know the feeling of getting something you've coveted, and you want. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any big answer apart from it just feels great to have it. It's lovely to turn pages. It's lovely to smell something that craft's gone into, and whether that be vinyl or a magazine or a book or, I don't know, a cup you've been after which is made by some like bespoke pottery. I don't know, whatever it is that floats your boat. I think we all realise that feeling of having something new and physical and how it makes you feel.
You do hear people say that about Kindles, don't they? I love my Kindle personally, but you do hear people say, oh, there's nothing like having a book, and you smell the pages and you hold it in your hands. And yet, the past decade has been a tough time to work in print. Newspaper circulations are down pretty much across the board. Various publications, be they newspaper or magazine, have gone digital only. Why do you think Mundial has survived and even thrived whilst others have struggled?
Well, I think it's probably worth saying that we did, the moment COVID hit, we put the magazine on pause, and that was done for the right reasons, really. So, in that magazines are expensive to print, everyone knows that. People weren't going to the shops, and a large part of, although we had subscribers who had been around since the beginning, and we grew that subscriber base over the years. People were still going into Smiths to buy the product, right? So it would have seemed, vanity and ego to carry on publishing it. Also with us, it was probably a little bit different in that the magazine was only one thing that we did. We managed to, when we went from doing one magazine to doing 4 a year, pretty quickly we had to take it full time because we were getting offered so much work by brands as an agency, because brands saw the tone of voice and the aesthetic and wanted us to do that first in print, but then in campaign work, then in video, audio, etc. So it has been difficult. And if we'd just been a standalone magazine, we probably wouldn't be here having this conversation, or we wouldn't have been in a position to be acquired. The fact was, it was one thing we did. We knew we could put it on pause while continuing to satisfy our audience by doing other things and just to tell them it was coming back. And it's been longer than we would have liked, but for the right reasons. Again, I think the pandemic's rumbled on longer than any of us thought it would. And then we've been able to do plenty of other things along the way. But when we reprinted all our back issues last year, we'd had lots of new fans come to us throughout the last couple of years who asked, oh, can I get back issues? Or I've just found out about you through the Giant podcast, or I've come to you through social. So we reprinted the full archive, and that showed there was still an appetite for it. So that was quite encouraging, because it's pretty easy just to become a magazine that doesn't exist anymore if you don't print for a while. But I think because we were quarterly, because it wasn't the only thing we did, because people sort of understood that we were an independent and they were sort of always rooting for us as an independent, we knew we could come back, and we will be coming back. So if I just doing a mainstream 12 issues a year out on the shelf every month, sort of fighting for the same print ad revenue, that must be really, really, really difficult. And I worked in that years ago when there was a recession in 2008, and it was hideous, because you suddenly see your paper stock gets thinner, the magazine gets thinner, the ad, you're fighting for more advertising space, the features get smaller and smaller, you can't send people anywhere, so you can really see the quality evaporate. And we were lucky, we decided to say, you know what, unless we can do it to the best of our abilities, we're just going to pause it for now. So I know that's a long answer, which probably hasn't answered your question, but that's sort of where we've been with it.
No, it does answer the question. I'm sure that must have been a tortuous, painstaking decision to take. You describe it now as such a sort of logical thing and very much determined to come back, and always felt like you would come back. But I'm sure at the time, who was involved in that? It can't have been that easy to actually say we're going to put even if temporary end to our baby.
It was awful. It was a horrible thing. It was just the grim realization that we were going to have to do it came first, because you look at it and you start to you look a few months ahead and think, well, if this thing doesn't end. So it was horrible to do, just in the fact we love working on it as well. Take everything else out of it. We, as people, love doing it. And, we love the creative process. We love bringing in new writers. Everyone loves seeing the response of something they've done out there, right? So, we've all got egos, and we all want people to love what we do. So it was difficult, but we had to get used to it pretty quickly, really, because we had a business to run. So I know that might sound a bit logical, but it was just that's where we were. I think, everyone was struggling to keep their head above water globally. Really, for those first few months, no one knew what was going on. So we had such another thing to focus on over here that we could sort of forget it. But we'd always be talking about, could we just bring it back digitally? Could we just do a digital sub? Would that take away from then us going to do print? So it was constantly our thoughts. We constantly talked about it. We worked on an issue which has never seen the light of day. We didn't get all the way through with it, but we did get certainly we'd done the flat plan. A few of the features had been commissioned. We were starting to think about how the cover would be. So we got down the road with that. And then, but look, I think importantly, we can go and do that again. But yeah, it was horrible.
I'm keen to understand, you said there were these new fans who came to you and they started asking for back issues. Now, I'm a Mundial fan and have been for years, and I maybe erroneously think of myself as probably pretty much your average Mundial fan. Some people would call me a little bit hipster. I probably wouldn't agree with that description, but I'm nostalgic. I'm a child of the 80s, 90s football through probably rose-tinted glasses. Just feels and smells perfect to me. Was it people like me who were coming and asking for these back issues, or were they new audiences?
It was a real mix. We did, at the height of all this, we did an audience survey as well, which we'd sort of always sporadically done, but this one was more we wanted to know who our audience was again, and we also wanted to float some things about how we would come back, and if we came back, how they'd want us to. So it was younger. It was quite a wide split, like an 18 to 44, which I know is often used as people like to say that if they haven't got a great audience and they're looking to get advertising money. Do you know what I mean? A lot of bullshit can be talked about your audience, but we were surprised with, I think, as you'd expect, sort of 25 to 40 was probably the core, about 60%. But there was as many over 40 as there was from 18 to 25, and that was quite surprising. So we saw a lot of people come to us through Giant that we did, the audio series with Spotify, that we got quite a few new people off that just coming. So I didn't know you guys were, but I'd listened to the podcast and I've come and the thing with football media, we might tweet something that broke through to normal football Twitter, as it were, and then you'd get the type of people from there. So it was a bit of a widespread. It was just, but the amount of people who went and bought all 21 issues when we put them back on sale, we didn't expect that. We would have, because if we had, it was probably a good thing, because we'd have probably done some big companion binder or box to go with it, and either never got them out or made really hard work of it. But it was great. We'd text each other and say someone else has just bought 21, or someone in like somewhere you've never heard of in Texas has just bought the whole back, the whole archive. So it was really comforting and actually quite exciting, and made us champion at the bit to do it again.
Knowing that you've got this broader audience than maybe you knew, and particularly thinking about Gen Z, do you have to think about different strategies? Maybe this is going back to print v digital, maybe it's talking about social media. Do you have to sort of think, well, we know this about Gen Z, so let's change what we're doing? Or is it a question of just sticking to your guns because it's working and they like it?
I think it's predominantly the latter, but you'd be, in terms of sticking to your guns, but we'd be fools if we didn't consider everything. Quite early on, we made a decision that we didn't only want to be seen as a nostalgic title, because it can only go so far. And not only that, we would have got bored with it as well, because as football fans, we all like what happened, what's happening now, and looking forward at what's going to happen. So we always made sure there was a good balance. We'd never really focus grouped the magazine. We were always pretty clear that we sort of understood our audience and understand what was good and what people would like. And I think if you get an interesting story and tell it well, and it looks good as well, you've pretty much got a good chance, right, of convincing other people of that. So But we all love football. So, I'm as happy talking about, a Maradona goal from 1985 that he'd scored and I hadn't seen for 20 years and I thought I'd imagined, as I am going, Christ, did you see Haaland last night? And I think that's pretty much true of people who, it's not true of everyone, of course. There are some people now who are only in the here and now, but that's the mass audience. And we were never going to be mass. So I think we always had a good idea of what a niche audience would like, and we were always pretty confident we could grow within that niche audience and reach more people. So yeah, but no, there was never any big. Maybe there should have been more of one. There was never a huge strategy, but it was tell good stories, tell what we can at the time, tell good stories, bring in new writers to help us tell those stories, and just try and ensure people who are getting it are loving it. I think that was one of the key things we'd always tried to do. Or maybe we just do because we're those types of people. And I don't mean that in a conceited way, but we were really good at doing stuff that people loved, but not always good at doing stuff people liked, which is both a strength and a weakness, I think.
I think it's interesting you talk about sort of, different decades or generations or types of football content there, the Maradona versus Haaland example. But something that I think that's interesting about Mundial is it crosses not only generations but also sort of cultural interests. There is fashion in there is culture, there are references to different music scenes, and that's very Mundial. And at the same time, that's also very Gen Z. A lot of research that we've done sort of shows that Gen Z isn't just obsessed with one thing, be it a team or a player or whatever. They actually like having these different cultural influences all sort of bundled in and referenced at the same time. So I can absolutely see that would be, a means of appealing to this new generation.
Yeah, and I think you see it more, don't you? I think, if 80s, 90s, you would occasionally see people who would have like a Juve top on or whatever. But now the amount of people who seem to follow the players as much as they do the teams, like you see more Mbappe jerseys than ever, or whatever it may be. So yeah, and I think we like that stuff anyway. So we're always gonna talk about it, and you can act as a bit of a filter as well. I suppose there's so much information, isn't there, about whether it's new music or new kits or new teams or whatever it may be. So, and I think someone said something to me years ago. I think I asked someone who was 17 or 18 at a launch, said, what do you get out of this? And he said, well, it's my big brother reads it, and I was always like, well, why is he reading that and I'm not? And he said, there's quite a few of us who nick it off our big brothers and things like that. So that was quite nice. And I remember my little brother nicking albums off me. So that resonated quite a lot.
I'm keen to talk about the Giant podcast. Terrific podcast, great guests, and probably opens up new audiences like we've been talking about. Do you approach that differently to the magazine?
In what way?
In terms of the things you want to talk about or the stories that you want to tell. I mean, are there some stories that are just better suited to podcasts, or is it more about the formats? Because you're always, even if an individual podcast is narrated by one person, you're always bringing in different points of view and different opinions.
Yeah, I think if you were... It's an interesting... I was thinking about this because I talked about this beforehand. Do some stories... I think you're just telling a story in a different way. Like we would do... I'm pretty confident we could... Let's say the first episode we ever did was about the Brazilian Ronaldo at PSV, right? It's a story. We looked around, hadn't really been told in depth. So that was a good reason to do it. There was no banner... film documentary about it. Like now, you wouldn't go and do a podcast now on Maradona at Napoli, right? Because as Steve's documentary, that's done that story. That story doesn't need to be told again. And if people are doing it, they need to probably, if they're trying to do it long form, they need to probably have a word with themselves and say, just leave it alone, right? There's ways of introducing it to a new audience, but you wouldn't go deep on that, I don't think. So we looked at Ronaldo, hadn't really been told. How would we have done it in print? We would have probably desk written it, maybe got a couple of people on the phone, it would have added to it. But because it was audio and because, we worked with a commercial partner in Spotify, and because that allowed us the budget to travel, and it was pre-COVID and all of that, so we could go and meet people. Of course, you want to do that as well. And we wanted to go to Eindhoven because we wanted to get a sense of what how the city played its part in the story as well, and how people remembered him. So I'm not sure it lends itself better. I think we just had an opportunity to tell stories differently by going to these places. Now, that was the first series. The second series, we did them all like this because we were in the middle of COVID. So, but it was, I don't know. I think if I was doing I'm just trying to think of a good example. So we've talked about Maradona a bit. The Maradona at Spurs episode from series 2, right? When he played one night. If I'd have been doing a print version of that, would I have used those guests we used? I don't know. Honestly, I don't. Or would I have just gone and watched as much footage and written about it and lifted some quotes? I don't know. I think the medium forces you to be original, definitely. Whereas sometimes in print you could rely on using quotes that have already been circulated or whatever, you know. Or you could not nick things but sort of repurpose things. Where I think it forced us to be original. It forced us to work harder. And we've all listened to boring audio, right? When a story you think, have you ever listened to something and you think, Jesus, that's a missed opportunity? It's something you should love, and you're listening to it thinking, I'm bored here and I should not be bored. We didn't want people to be bored. Tayo, the producer we work with, is an audio genius, and he always, the one thing he taught us or told us at the beginning when we came together was, what are your favourite podcasts and why? We went through it, and everyone really filled up the headphones, right? So that would be, the bed would be really interesting, and the music could be done in a really interesting way, and there would be lots and lots of different sounds. So it was really, really multi-layered. So it was just like full-on audio escapism every time. So I think it was that side of things which I maybe hadn't appreciated before, coming from a more traditional background. That helped us tell stories in different ways. And then when you get into that and start doing it, it leads you to push it further, I suppose.
And it's only available on Spotify, right? What's your relationship with them? Was that a conscious decision to choose to only go down Spotify? Was it originally, did the idea originate initially with Spotify? I mean, most podcasts, including this one, sort of get pushed out on all platforms. There's an increased total potential audience, but tell us a bit about that relationship with Spotify.
The relationship was, people had said to us from sort of inception, really, oh, you guys should do a podcast. Now, what we didn't want to do was do another four people, predominantly, 4 blokes sat around talking about what had happened or what may happen. So that was the first thing. We weren't going to do that. There was enough of them. The good ones do it really, really well. There's more of them now that don't do it as well. But then at the time, the good ones did it well. Why would you try and self-publish to break through into a market that was pretty saturated? And we decided if we were going to ever do anything audio-wise, it had to be as good, if not better, than the magazine. So it became pretty clear. And we used an ESPN 30 for 30 as well. I don't know if you listened to their audio series. That was quite a big... We'd like to do something like that for football because they do it brilliantly, but it's pretty much all American sports. And we realised the only way we were going to be able to do that was if we did it with a commercial partner. So we decided to wait rather than try and self-publish, maybe do 2 or 3 episodes and just do another failed podcast. So there was a bit of a strategy to that, and we waited and we met a few different people. And over about 18 months, we started speaking to a contact at Spotify who we knew from before. And Alex, she had been a Mundial subscriber, so she sort of knew our long form credentials and was a fan of them. So I suppose over about a period of a year, we went back and forth and, can we get the budget to do this? And went back and forth on ideas. And then she came and said, I think I can get this green lit. So can you come up with a slate? And it will be a Spotify original. So we'll only be publishing it on our channels, but it's going to be, one of our banner shows. And they were just moving into their original things then. They hadn't really done many in the UK. I think it might have been the first UK original. I don't know. Certainly the only one that's won any awards. But yeah, I think it was the first UK original. Either way, a lot of people moaned about that on social. I can only listen to it here. It's like, look, that's not our decision. Would we have liked to see it more places? Of course, you want more. You want to reach as many people as possible. But really, that wasn't our concern. We got commissioned to try and make an industry-leading audio documentary series, and that's what we did. The first series is available on Apple, but Apple don't. But yeah, it's Spotify's business strategy. They want to create more original content. It's like in the early days of it's like when Netflix started out. You want to stick to your guns in stuff like that, right? If you're going to become a destination, and it's not for me to talk about their strategy, but they wanted to make originals, and they're making more and more of them. So I presume it's been a good decision for them. And I must say, they were very supportive as a company to work with for us. They allowed us to have a lot of editorial leeway. They trusted us in the process. They trusted us as a football brand. They trusted us as storytellers, and they were always really receptive to our ideas and how we wanted to do it, and really backed us to do that.
Do they have any editorial input? Would they try to influence the type of things that you talk about, the stories you tell, maybe even the guests you get on?
Guests, yeah, well, a bit of both. I mean, but it was always very collaborative. It was never you've got to do it this way. And there was, so editorially, yeah, they'd always have an input because they were, they're producers and audio heads as well, the people we were dealing with. So of course, but only to make it better. It was never that. There was never like a million edits from 30 different people coming in 5 different email chains. All the stuff we have all seen, I'm sure, that take work from up here good to down here ruined by 1,000 cuts. It was never like that. It was always really collaborative, and they helped us be able to lean on some people from Gimlet as well, who we had hugely admired and had listened to their shows before. So it really helped. It was really good because we were quite a small team working on it. So then to be able to tap in to people who had done this on both sides of the Atlantic it was helpful. So it was a really good collaborative process.
I want to talk about guests, and that could be guests on a podcast, that could be front cover stars on a magazine. Maybe you've interviewed them, maybe you've just profiled them and written about them. Looking back, have you got any favourite cover star, any favourite podcast guests, any person that you personally have enjoyed profiling, writing about, speaking about more than any other?
My favourite interview I've ever done, I think, was Michelle Akers, who we did for the second episode of Series 1 of Giant. We'd been on the road for a few weeks, which is, of course, amazing. But, you're pretty knackered after 3 weeks of going left, right and centre and crossing time zones to 2 interviews. And we'd been in a lot of cities. We're pretty knackered. We pulled up at her farm in rural Georgia. Sorry, where was she? Georgia is Atlanta. Just outside Atlanta, yeah. And it was amazing. She was like, she's got a rescue horse farm. She just pulled up a couple of buckets. We sat on there. I mean, she was like FIFA Player of the Century, won 2 World Cups, Olympics, scored over 100 goals for the US, was the first big women's soccer star. And, we'd been asking people across the US saying, we're interviewing Michelle Akers on next Wednesday. And people were like, what? Really? And then, so more and more throughout the couple of weeks, we started to realise, I'd be lying if I knew her full reputation. I knew her reputation, but I really understood the impact of her on the game in the US. So when we sat down and she was just so open, and it was just like chatting to someone you'd known for years, and she told me all the things about the women's game I sort of suspected but hadn't really considered. She told me her story of how she managed to become the best player in the world again after debilitating illness and injury that would have stopped most people playing. So it was just a really euphoric end to a trip, and I didn't expect it to be that good. You can go in with preconceptions, and sometimes you go into the interview thinking, I'm only going to get 20 minutes here and I might not get these questions answered, or they've already told me I can't get those questions answered. Nothing was off the table. She said, ask me whatever you want. So we did, and it became, like all the best interviews, it became a conversation for, an hour and a half. Dogs were running around, there's horses kicking off in the background. Like, it was just, it was fun. From that side of things, it was fantastic. I could go on about that for hours, about how great that experience was, and how much I enjoyed it, and how privileged I was to tell her story. Actually, we could have just done the whole episode on. Looking back, we could have done the whole episode on Michelle. So yeah, and then in terms of the mag, it took us a while to really find out who we were. So we got to the 8th issue, and we had Pirlo on the cover, and that was a very sort of, that's what you'd expect Mundial to have on the cover. And we were sort of caught in between 2 or 3 ways of doing it. So we decided just to go on a run of Legends covers, just to see the response. We did Eric for the first one, and sales dramatically, sales increased a lot, subscriber base increased, and that allowed us to work on the magazine inside. We suddenly started to realise who we were. So Cantona was big for us, because he probably, if you drew a Mundial player, Cantona's not far off, right? Politically sound, little bit of a rebel, did some stupid things, and probably one of the, if you weren't a Man United fan in the 90s, which I wasn't, it was all right to like him because it was Cantona. So he transcends loyalties and transcends the game a little bit. So he was great to do, showed us a different way to go. Of course, doing Maradona was brilliant, and James's piece when he went to Naples for a week is still one of the best things we ever published. And then we did Hector for issue 15, and that was a little bit different because we'd been offered a few current players before. We'd done John Stones earlier on, and John was lovely. We put him on the cover, and then he didn't play a minute of the Euros, so that wasn't great. And we were getting, pallets of magazines sent back. I think more issues came back from Scotland than we sent up there. Such was their lack of desire to be buying an issue with an England player on the cover, which is fair enough.
And which is different, right, for Mundial. I mean, you spoke about Pirlo or Cantona being players who transcend club rivalries, and I think that encapsulates a lot of what Mundial's about. I think people read it, and it's not club loyal. I suspect you wouldn't find any sort of particular pattern of skewing more to one club than another in your readership. So the Stones one, that must have sort of stood out as a different reaction from the public.
Yeah, it did. We weren't as heavily on the newsstand then. That was still in sort of phase 1 when we were doing a lot more of direct sales and your more smaller, like cool magazine shops, I suppose, for want of a better word. But then when we did Bellerin, it was quite interesting because we just thought he was a good bloke, and we were proved right when we interviewed him. I mean, that was pretty easy. He followed us. We just DM'd him, said, "Do you fancy doing the cover?" And he said, "Yeah." So we had a day with him in a studio in East London somewhere, or North London, and he was fantastic. He was as nice to the people who normally get ignored on the set. So the intern we had helping us, or the makeup assistant, he was as nice to them as he was the photographer, or the people, or Dan who was going to interview him, or me who was producing it. It was just everything we'd hoped came true. He was just a lovely guy, generous with his time. Similarly, nothing was off record. He was happy to talk and happy to answer. And I've said that a couple of times now. It's because that's what you want. You need that if you're gonna commit to doing a player and shooting them and all the things that go with it. Then you've got to get the time to justify doing it, because as a reader, I wouldn't want to get a mag with someone. I wouldn't want to buy a magazine I loved with someone on the front I was interested in, to then find out you didn't really get much inside. And that used to be a bit of a trope with mags. They'd use cover stars to get people in, and then you wouldn't really get a lot. And we just didn't want to do that. So yeah, Hector was great. I didn't go on the Mané shoot, but it was nice to do him. Similarly, he was pretty good. His agents were pretty good beforehand, saying, yeah, just talk about what you want to talk about. So, and I think, looking at the interview Mo Salah did with GQ as well recently, I think that might be coming back a little bit more. I think players and their agents are starting to realise that although it can be difficult having a relationship with the press. Look, we all seen what's happened with the tabloids over the years, and how the England squad and Southgate, they stood up to that and refused to take it anymore. And that's probably been better for fostering relations. I think people are starting to realise the benefits of opening up a little bit more. Rooney's just done this documentary where he talks about some of the problems he's had. So, hopefully when we start printing again, we may look at doing more interviews for covers, but just that we can, offer something new. I'd like to spend a week with a player going to and from training. That might be too much, but just to give people a proper insight, because otherwise you're not really getting anything. So So yeah, lots of them. You know, we did a World Cup issue with 21 covers as well. That's the thing I think we're most proud of, because that did nearly finish everyone. That was a hard slog.
I think you're right that players are happy to open up, and I think for some of them it comes very naturally. I think probably the younger generation in particular, they grew up already on social media and already interacting, and that started when no one knew them, and now millions of people know them, and perhaps they're sort of more natively comfortable in that environment. But I think other players are also realizing that this is something they should do or have to do. There's probably also a commercial reason to it. Their marketability increases with the perception that people have of them. I mean, what I love about the Mundial pieces, be it about ex-players, in which this is quite easy, or someone like the Bellerin interview, which is probably harder, is that it still feels timeless. You could still pick that up in 10 years' time and think, oh yeah, that's interesting. And he's not talking about, last week was disappointing / great / whatever else. I mean, I know you said earlier you don't want Mundial necessarily to just be thought of as a nostalgic magazine, but there is an element of nostalgia about that. What makes a player, makes or made a player, or an event or a tournament or a team special, talk about their impact and their legacy. And I think my final question to you today is, many years from now, and I'm not suggesting, Mundial won't still be around and thriving, what would you like to think Mundial's legacy might be in the football publishing space?
I'm not going to rush, let me think. First and foremost, that it made people happy to get it. And it replicated the buzz I got when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, going into WH Smith and opening the filing cabinet and finding my folder and taking the 3 magazines I'd been waiting for, and the buzz of getting home. I hope it educated a little bit. I hope it highlighted issues that maybe weren't being highlighted elsewhere originally. Want people to remember how good it looked and that we really cared. And what will that's from a legacy. I'll be able to open it up in 20 years and remember the graft that went into even the little things like the page furniture, and how long we agonised over a headline, and how much work was put into making sure the pull quotes all really worked. So I think the craft and how that transmits on a variety of levels will be. Just want people to know, we gave it our absolute best shot of producing the best product we could every time we did it. And did we always do that? Probably not. There's no such thing as, perfection, is there? But we just gave it our all to produce something that people love. And whenever we meet people who loved it, then that means a lot.
Owen, thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Final thing, listeners who want to see more, hear more, whether from you or Mundial, where can they go?
They can follow us on Twitter at Mundial Mag, or on Instagram at Mundial Mag. You'll get a sort of snippets of what we can do editorial on Instagram, and we might make you laugh on Twitter, we might make you unfollow us pretty quickly, and you can go on the website of mundialmag.com and to see when we're going to come back with a print magazine.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Owen. And thank you. If you want to hear more of this, please make sure you're following this podcast on your preferred podcast platform. And don't forget to review or share this on social media. All the best.